Okay, so I've been thinking about the idea of doing a Gamergate book over this weekend, over the bank holiday weekend. Um, and if I am going to do it, now would be the time to do it. Coming down off completing Gore with the breathing space that the money from that gives me is a good time to do it. To try and get it in there before Zoe Quinn's book comes out, or even to release to coincide with that, would be a good idea. Sarkeesian has just completed Tropes vs. Women in Video Games, which is another sort of time marker here. And all the reasons I gave for putting the book out still remain. I think it's important that we do not allow the history of this event to be controlled by the people who lost, really the people who created the problems in the first place. If we allow them to dictate how this is remembered and recalled and archived, I don't think that's a good thing for the future. I don't think it's a good thing for social history if people look back on things like this. And I think it's significant enough that it should be looked back on, and in its proper context. And you consider things like the Satanic Panic, that had a major long-term cultural impact, and it's definitely worth knowing about and recalling and getting people's perspectives from the time. So yeah, I think it's justified to try and do this. That said, there's already Brad Glasgow's book which will be coming out, which is likely to be quite sort of technical heavy, fairly heavily researched kind of book. And apparently Daddy Warpig is also doing a book as well, which is likely to be the other way, I would think. So is there really a need for a book from my perspective? Well, the way I would go about it, if I were to write it, would be as a kind of counter to the way that Zoe Quinn and others have put out their material, their biased perspective. I would seek to give a kind of gonzo journalist perspective of what happened to me, what I was feeling, how I was experiencing what was going on from within Gamergate, and offering my interpretations and so on. I would offer citations and so on where I felt that they were useful or necessary, but it wouldn't be a full-on academic work. It would be a perspective work. It would be the kind of thing that might be useful to social historians in the future. That would be what I would be going for, a kind of a perspective, a countering perspective, a different perspective, a more truthful and honest perspective than that you might get out of someone like Zoe Quinn. That said, because there's these other works coming out, I don't feel a huge amount of pressure anymore. This is something that I absolutely have to do, which is how I was kind of feeling before the weekend. Now I feel that it would be something it would be nice to do, but not something that is as pressingly important as it once was. So here's what my plan is going to be. I'll set up a fixed funding Indiegogo fundraiser, but I'm not going to make a huge fuss about it. It either succeeds or it doesn't. There's not a lot of rewards I can really give to people on this, aside from the book, which is likely to sell for 99 cents, $1.99, something like that, because we want a lot of people to read it. We want a price point that's going to encourage the most people to pick it up, because it's something we want people to hear. But that means there's not really a lot I can offer to backers. You might be paying $10, $20, $30 for something that's going to sell for $1 at the end as an ebook. So it's hard to really see what I can offer people as incentives other than wanting to see this come out, So it's a bit tricky. Maybe I can offer people copies of my other fiction, something like that. A thank you in the book, the usual kind of semi bullshit stuff that people offer, and I can set additional target points. I do it as fixed funding, aiming for around $1,000, enough to basically pay me for 2 months of work, on top of what I get from other sales and stuff that's going on without me having to put too much effort in. And then on top of that, maybe if we hit 1,200, I'd commission a new piece of art. If we don't hit that target, then I'd just do something fairly abstract for the cover for myself. And then if we hit another target, then I'd put it through full professional editing rather than the kind of ad hoc process and crowd editing that I would expect to do otherwise. So there's things we can do for extra targets, but there's not a lot I can really offer people backing other than the satisfaction of seeing another book, a different book come out. But I think I can offer enough in terms of the book itself to make it worthwhile and hopefully attract enough backers who were involved at the time and want to see that kind of record. What I can bring to this, I think, is that I understand history. I have an historical perspective on a lot of things. I have formal qualifications in politics and history, amongst other things. Not huge qualifications, but these are interests that have existed in me for a long time that I've maintained. So I think I can give that perspective. I also know a lot about the history of fandoms and the history of games in particular, and I think that allows me to contextualize this moral panic in a way that millennials and onwards can't necessarily. They can't see the parallels in the identitarian politics that they're inflicting on us, and the moral panic that they're inflicting on us, and the satanic panic of the past, or the explicit lyrics labeling on metal music, or all the fuss around the comics code and things like that. They can't necessarily understand and contextualize and draw parallels between those things, whereas I think I can. Plus, I've got a personal perspective that I think is quite powerful and interesting in this. I mean, for me, Gamergate was so devastating in a way, because even though I'd been running into problems in my own work in tabletop gaming, which is another perspective I can bring, I still always felt that the majority of creative people, whether it be people involved in writing, in art, in comics, in tabletop games, in computer games, whatever else, I always felt that they were at least against censorship, and they were at least interested in what was true, and that they would at least go to bat for the sake of their art, as they had done previously. People bucked and fought against all these previous moral panics and issues that I've talked about, and they did it very eloquently. And we have funds like the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, or the various others that have helped defend quite dubious forms of expression because they believe in free expression. And yet somehow when it came to Gamergate, all that fell away. People weren't taking the steps that I expected them to defend their art, to defend their subculture, to defend free expression and so on. Something fundamental had shifted since the whole, I guess, the last really big one, I guess, was all the fuss around Columbine and school shootings and goth subculture and vampire subculture and Marilyn Manson and new goth and shock metal and all that kind of stuff. That was kind of the last shake of that in the sort of 90s through to the early 2000s, and people stood up at that point and said, no, you're being ridiculous, you're being absurd, and Jack Thompson and so on around the same kind of period. But something has changed fundamentally since then to now, to the point where we were being attacked by our own communities, the people who should have been standing up as they stood up before. And that whole betrayal was very hard for me to deal with. So I think that's another important aspect of perspective that needs to be put forward here. Anyway, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to set up fixed funding Indiegogo, lay out all of this, set it up, leave it running. I won't heavily promote it the way I do game projects and so on. I'll just see if we happen to accumulate enough. If we do, then I'll go ahead and I'll take 2 months out to write the book. If we don't, then no biggie. I'll suggest to people that they support Daddy Warpig's effort and that they support Brad Glasgow's effort in particular, because his neutral sort of statistic-led approach is probably as valuable as the perspective that I want to give. But we'll see. No biggie either way, really. Zang.